Și acum, doamnelor și domnilor, vom merge, mă simt un pic ca la Eurovision, Bucharest Calling, și vom merge în Norvegia, nu? Țara care a organizat Eurovisionul de multe ori. Vreau să mergem acolo la îl avem pe domnul Frode SORENSEN? Da, iată-l. Hello, sir, and welcome. Este Senior Advisor la Norwegian Communication Authority și este cu noi via Skype. Hello, Bucharest calling. I said earlier I feel like on Eurovision, you know, calling Norway.
Hello, this is Frode speaking.
Hello, sir, and welcome. I hope you see us. We see you very well on a huge screen on a mall in Bucharest. We are in the Cinemaplex, actually, here, and enjoying how technology can improve our lives today. And we need your input in our conference. So, let me start with this question. How much room is there for national differences within European Union when it comes to effective application of net neutrality?
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. Regarding your question, as you probably know, there is recently adopted a new European regulation of net neutrality, and in that regard, it is a requirement that net neutrality regulation is aligned all over Europe. Of course, there can be some national variations, but they have to be within the framework of the European regulation. So this means, as far as we have understood, that, for example, countries that already have a national law regulating net neutrality, they would probably have to adopt their law according to the European regulation. Moving on to my presentation, on the next slide I will start to discuss the value of net neutrality. A good illustration of the value of net neutrality is obvious if you compare how the internet works in comparison with other types of networks we've had for several years. For example, cable TV networks and traditional telecommunication networks, they, as we have experienced, have not had the same type of innovation as we can see on the internet. If you look at applications like Facebook and Google, which has been presented today already, as I know, but also European applications like Skype and Spotify from our Swedish neighbor have been obvious examples of the innovation of the internet. So this is what we want to preserve with internet net neutrality. The Norwegian objective for net neutrality is that we want to ensure an internet which remains an open and non-discriminatory platform for all types of communication and content distribution. In this short presentation, I want to kill a couple of concerns that has been expressed regarding net neutrality. First of all, I want to say that net neutrality is not regulating the internet, which has been insinuated by some people. It is, on the contrary, safeguarding an open and non-discriminatory internet. So what we want to prevent is that the use of the internet is restricted by the providers of the internet access service. That is the goal of net neutrality. Moving on to the next slide, we can illustrate how the internet is different from telecommunications, the traditional telecommunications, in 3 steps. The internet communication is decoupled from the underlying network, which means when you provide some content or some application, it's decoupled from the underlying network, which means you can develop some software, install it on a PC, and thereby provide new functionality. This is opposite of what is in traditional networks, where you have to change the whole network to implement new functionality. This decoupling facilitates an immense innovation of content and applications. As has been illustrated earlier today, every user of the internet is thereby able to participate in this innovation. So the number of users of the internet is immense compared to, for example, the number of employees in a private enterprise. So this is the basis for the amount broadness we see in different applications on the internet. And finally, on the third step, this development of new applications is driving the demand for content applications. So by people requesting new content, which is becoming popular, this also drives the demand for high-speed access, which means that the internet is also a big business opportunity for internet service providers. So this enormous growth of traffic is not a problem, it's the business opportunity. And finally, killing another concern which has been expressed, there is a concern that many of these content and application providers on the internet are US-based. But it's obvious, I think, that by blocking and throttling content and applications, which is breaching net neutrality, we would not stimulate European content and application providers. So this is what we want to achieve with net neutrality. Moving on to the next slide, presenting the Norwegian approach to net neutrality, which is based on a co-regulatory approach. This is conducted in 3 different phases. In the first phase, we had an introduction of net neutrality in the country by conducting large discussions together with stakeholders in the market, engaging internet service providers, content and application providers, and end users. Based on these discussions, we in 2009 managed to provide an agreement about national guidelines in Norway. Moving on to the next phase, these guidelines were shown to be adaptive when new situations emerged in the market, for example, when mobile internet access services flourished in the early 2010 and going on the next years. It was clarified that net neutrality should also cover the mobile internet access. And also when over-the-top services, CDN services, Netflix services, etc. Came into the market, the net neutrality guidelines were also adaptive in that regard, since it was based on principles which could also be applied regarding new applications introduced in the market. And finally, in the third step, which we are in now, the consolidation phase, where net neutrality has become a mainstream topic for the discussion in the society. It is also a stage where we have to move from a national approach over to a more unified European approach based on the telecom single market regulation. Then on my next slide, I will give a brief overview of development in the European net neutrality discussion. First, we can see that already in the 2009 Telecom package, there was some regulation of net neutrality, although it was very general and didn't provide any specific guidance on how to regulate net neutrality. But BEREC has had an active approach to net neutrality, established a separate working group in 2010, and developed a net neutrality policy over the next 3 years. Also in this phase, there was conducted a traffic management investigation, and it became obvious that many users on the European basis were affected by breaches to net neutrality. As much as every 5th fixed access and every 3rd mobile access had breaches to net neutrality in their service provisioning. Then moving on to the national developments in the same years, we can see Norway as a first mover in net neutrality regulation based on a co-regulatory approach, was also followed by a more legal hard law approach from the Netherlands and Slovenia as 2 well-known examples. And we also saw the year after, in 2013, that many countries were looking into legislative initiatives. Basis where there were obvious breaches of net neutrality in Europe, but also a fragmented approach to regulation of net neutrality. The Commission came with their proposed regulation in 2013. And as illustrated on the next animation, we can see that this initiative from the Commission was followed by a resolution in the Parliament in 2014 and also a proposal from the Council in 2015. And those three political institutions agreed in the three-log discussions to adopt net neutrality rules, which will enter into force these days in Europe. This was also a simultaneous development as we had in the US, which gives a very interesting comparison between the two continents, where there are clear similarities about how you regulate net neutrality, but also some differences as well. And then moving on to the conclusion, in my final slide, what will happen the next years? First of all, net neutrality as a general political discussion has been on a rather high level, and my presentation has covered the general approach to net neutrality. But as many of you will know already, many of the problems regarding how to regulate net neutrality in detail is regarding specific topics. When you look into the details of what is reasonable traffic management, what kind of services can you provide in addition to the Internet Access Service, the so-called specialized services, and the upcoming discussion about zero rating, how does it relate to net neutrality? If you move into the details of these questions, then the really complex side of net neutrality becomes obvious. And as many of you know, BEREC has been given the task to develop European guidelines for net neutrality. And these questions are examples of issues that will be looked into in the upcoming work of BEREC to develop these European guidelines. So looking further ahead, the next 5 years, which is the horizon of your discussion today, it will of course be very interesting to see how this regulation of net neutrality will influence development of the European Internet. That goes both for the infrastructure with broadband access services, but also for the content and application layer, where we want to facilitate a good atmosphere for also development of European content and application providers. And of course also it will be interesting to compare how the European regulation is if you look into the US regulation, but also many other countries around the globe are looking into net neutrality regulations these days, taking it to major countries like India and Brazil, where this development of net neutrality regulation is actively developed these days. Therefore, it will become very interesting to look into how, on a global basis, net neutrality will change over time. And as you know, of course, Internet is an international network. So if it's possible to provide a global approach to net neutrality, which is more or less similar around across different countries, that would of course be the best approach for a regulation of the Internet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sorensen.